Hello, good afternoon or good morning. I'm Stoffel. I will be moderating this talk. And today I'm very happy and very honored to have a filmmaker with us whose work has continuously moved me, touched me, for its singular sensibility and generosity. I think a sensibility that is grounded, steeped in a very deep felt empathy and curiosity, which are, I think, emotions and intuitions which are quite precious. And we felt that sensibility yesterday evening during the world premiere of his latest film, Mário, which is a portrait of the Pan-African intellectual activist, poet Mário de Andrade. I think this film also continues his engagement with the interweavings or the intersections between poetics and politics, the culture, the spirit of culture and the spirit of critique. So give a warm applause to Bill Woodberry. So we have 90 minutes to talk about your work. We have selected a few clips. Some of the clips are of your work. Other clips are films that have been important for you, or films by filmmakers who have been important to you. And of course, we will talk about your new film. But I propose that we can also talk a bit about some of the resonances and commonalities which are present throughout your work, perhaps. And I already mentioned that I think a lot of your work plays out in these interspaces between poetics and politics, also cinema and music and so forth. And perhaps we can start with one of those dimensions, which is politics. Because I think before going into cinema, before studying film, you were very much interested in political theory, leftist culture, Marxism. Maybe you can talk a bit about that, how your political views, your political approach has been shaped at that time.
Okay. Welcome, thank you for coming, for your presence. And I hope we have an interesting conversation. I think it's true that when I was younger, I sort of came into contact with some ideas that remain important to me. I was like a lot of young people in the post-civil rights era and the and during the post-Black Power and that kind of thing. But also, it was the time of the Vietnam War, so it was not so difficult to find stimulating and interesting ways to try to understand and account for the world and the society that we were living in. And the ideas, radical ideas, touched a lot of people of my age. It touched a lot of younger black people and others. And it was a time when people we thought maybe the previous politics and approach and that kind of thing was not providing the answers or the means to analyze and understand the world as we found it. So eventually, it's an interesting thing because yesterday, not stargazing, but yesterday was the 79th birthday of Angela Davis. And I have to say, because of the charges against Angela Davis, the pursuit of Angela Davis, the imprisonment of Angela Davis, and a massive campaign organized to free and save Angela Davis, that made a lot of people of my generation curious about the charges against her. Why was she so terrible? And she was terrible because, and some of my later colleagues at the film school at UCLA, they made one of the first films about her. Charles Burnett and a woman named Yolanda is a French woman. They made one of the first films about Angela Davis. It's called Angela Davis Revolutionary. But more importantly, what happened after the repression of 1950s, and in my generation, we grew up inundated with anti-communist culture and ideology and attendant paranoia and suspicion about this kind of thing, right? So then we thought at maybe 19, 20 years old, Angela Davis. Okay, so Angela Davis refused to sign a loyalty oath and not declaring that she was a member of the Communist Party of the United States. So on that basis, she's denied her teaching position at the University of California. Okay, so what is communism? So a lot of the copies of the Communist Manifesto go out of the library and they become readily available. And people start to at least have the openness of mind to wonder why this was so terrible. So in fact, it had the effect of making people more curious and more wanting to know about these things. And in truth, I won't go on because I'm notorious for this, but I digress. I was walking across the campus of University of California, Santa Barbara one night in 1969. I didn't go to that school. I went to the community college, City College of Santa Barbara. But I lived there with a friend. We had an apartment that neither one of us slept in very much, right? But I was walking across and I met a friend from Brooklyn who was from my school. And they were they were seekers and they were onto every radical trend that existed, trying to find the answers, right? And I met Leon walking across campus, and Leon said, "Brother, this is it." And he showed me a copy of the Communist Manifesto, right? So I said, okay, but Leon, it was a lot of this is it with Leon, right? So maybe it took me some time to eventually read the thing, but I did. So when I went to finish my undergraduate studies, I was already sort of curious and in touch with this. I met some friends. There was a friend from Ghana. He had been an Olympic sprinter, and he had a friend who was a Jamaican guy who was an obsessive about track and field. So he knew Stan. Stan was the Ghanaian guy. And so me and Stan were in a class together, and Stan said, "Oh, so you read Marx. Okay, I need to introduce you to someone." So he introduced me to a Jamaican guy named Trevor Campbell, right? And so Trevor said, "Oh, my brother, we must go to the bookstore together, and you must build a library and all this kind of thing." So in a way, that's how I became sort of immersed in that, right? Then there were other people that I met, and then we started to study and try to understand the methodology and the points and the issues involved in that. And we read vociferously, we debated, we pursued this culture, you know? And I remember we had a cultural space in the city in Los Angeles, and it was called The Long March, right? And it was quite wonderful because it was sort of really ecumenical in that all the different groups, tendencies, and sects came there for the cultural programs and for the films and other things. and you could meet really interesting people. And if the leaders of the Long March tended to be a bit Maoist, it was not offensive, right? Because it was like, you could still find other tendencies, you know? But it was just a wonderful place to be. It was an important cultural space. The Cuban exiles, the gusanos, they call them, it's not a nice term. They blew it up a couple of times, right? And they would build it back and that kind of thing. And I say that because that was, in fact, the kind of, it wasn't just the reading and trying to understand the text and this thing, as important as that was. It was also seeking a kind of culture. So it's one thing, later when I see the movies in the film school, in the history classes, that kind of thing, I already knew those movies, and I saw them in a space that was very encouraging, hospitable, and naively, you know, romantic, right? So I saw Eisenstein, I saw Fudovkin, I saw Bertolt Brecht. I saw the film of Three Penny Opera that Bertolt Brecht hated, that he brought a lawsuit. But I mean, that was partly my culture, okay? And it was wonderful. It was not the majority tendency or trend, even among my African-American brothers and sisters, but it was part of my development and that kind of thing. And the day would start on Saturday. Also, a lot of us work full-time in factories and other things, not to proletarianize ourselves. We weren't playing that. Some of our later comrades did that, but we were real ones, right? We were really just supplementing our studies and that kind of thing. And so that made it sort of make sense, you know? And we were doing it after work. And on our weekends, we start the day we would go to the Communist Party bookstore, Progressive Books on 7th Street, right? And we would meet the old grannies and the seniors, and we listened to their stories. And my friend Trevor would provoke the lady who worked there, brilliant lady, university graduate, but Trevor would say, Clara, who's the greatest revolutionary in the world today? And Clara would say, Mao Zedong, but don't let him hear you. So it was this, I mean, it's a very human thing, okay. So that was part of it. Then, the one thing that happened, and I was reminded because I was just reading some books, part of the story of the political development among the black population in the United States from 1960s, I only go back to that, up to the 70s, there was a kind of renewed and dynamic pursuit of knowledge about the history and the culture and the expression and the language and all things related to this group, right? And a lot of books that hadn't been published for years, they began to be demanded. There were courses in the university, African American history, African American culture, music, those things. So those books came back into print. And you could read those things, and there was a demand, right? So generally there was that. There was the black arts movement, the poets, you know, the theater groups, the different forms of cultural expression. It was quite a lively place, huh? A lively time. It's one thing that happened after this urban rebellions in the 1970s was it manifested itself in a kind of cultural phenomenon. In a way, it's too complicated for our discussion. In a way, what happened was there was a political tendency, a movement, and a focus in the civil rights era, then on through the more radical period. But what lasted until today, and what people understand about that and know about that in a way, is the cultural manifestations of it, okay? The outward things, the hair, the music, the slogans, also things you could buy, okay, that can be circulated and can be bought and sold, okay? But it's not only that, okay? But if you just keep in mind also the counterculture, the challenges to the restrictions, the conformity, the stupidity of the culture that we inherited after Second World War, and the coming of the McCarthyism and the repression but also the expansion of the possibility to consume. Teenagers, we became a thing, right? Because they want to sell us the music that we like and the clothes that we like, and we're in a conflict with our parents because they're lame and don't understand, but there was an opening and experimentation that was really necessary, important, and that was vital and has lasted in a way to challenge certain restrictions and limitations, and to have the expectation that you could be a full citizen, that you could exercise the rights that are guaranteed to you by the Constitution and the various amendments that arose after Civil War and through the history of the country. So anyway, maybe I wasn't thinking about or knowing all those things. I'm telling you partly an experiential track and a kind of thing of trying to educate and understand and reflect on those things, right? So now you know some of my bias, prejudices, and that kind of thing.
Your new film, Mário, deals with the spirit of Pan-Africanism and internationalism, also the intersection between the negritude movements, the anti-colonial movements. Was that something you were already tuned into at the time?
I think I was aware of that. I was tuned into that. But at the same time, ours, and I will be more specific, ours was a post this kind of black nationalist consciousness, and it was post negritude in a way, because in a way a lot of the claims about blackness and some mystification about it, right, comes from negritude. It's just, blackness is just negritude, a claim for negritude in English, really, right? It's negritude. It's not as sophisticated, elaborate, and elegant as Mr. Senghor, nor is it as radical as Mr. Césaire, but those strengths, they exist, right? And people make claims for that. And the post-negritude question, you can see it in this movie of William Klein. We have clips in that movie. We use a clip from that movie, but in William Klein's movie, you see a long speech and a discourse and a critique of negritude. In 1969, that next generation of people, which coincides with the evolution and development of the national liberation movements and the theories and knowledge, primarily from the Portuguese anti-colonial movement, is post-negritude, okay? Even Mário, who as a young one realized the importance of it, asserted it in the context of the Portuguese experience. By 1965-66, Mário is aware that negritude has serious limitations as a claim. This, in fact, in a way I learned the affinity between Usman Sembène and comrades from the Portuguese liberation movements is partly a consequence of Sembène's own analysis and critique of negritude and their acknowledgement and critique of negritude. Okay, we know it's important, but it's important, necessary, but not sufficient to where we need to go in terms of transforming the world that we face. It's only our limitations in the United States, maybe, to not know so many other languages that may limit the representation that we project and that we prefer. We don't know so much about the radical analysis and critiques from the intellectuals from Francophone world. I'm still discovering them, right? And they weren't, no, they were the opposition. They weren't the leaders in the post-independence movements in those countries, but they existed and they were important figures and thinkers and teachers, and I am still discovering them. But so I think that's the case. The other thing is Mario is very close to René Depest, the Haitian poet and writer and thinker. They were very close. And Haiti was the expression, was the instance and the expression of how negritude can really be taken over and instrumentalized by very, very, very horrible forces. The Duvalier regime in Haiti, that imprisoned, tortured, killed, drove into exile many, many brilliant people on the claims that, and Papa Doc made the greatest use and claims about negritude. So it already forces us to make some, to engage it more critically, okay? Is it important? Yes. Was it the thing? The other thing is, you know, there's George Padmore, who was a communist in the beginning, but he was a principal advisor to Nkrumah in Ghana. He is the of his time. The later Du Bois and all those people were Pan-Africanists. Mr. Garvey was a Pan-Africanist, right? There's different tendencies always in Pan-Africanism, but Mr. Padmore wrote a book that was maybe important. It's called Pan-Africanism or Communism, okay? And these are people who maybe they had been in the communist movement, and at a certain point they found it lacking in their judgment for what was required and what was needed for the African people, okay? So they were very convinced and committed to the idea of a Pan-African unity as the basis upon which the people from Africa and people of African descent would fight for the justice and those things in the world, okay? And that as a bloc, they could command respect and, you know, they had a greater capacity, okay? And Nkrumah had a very radical idea about this and hoped and proposed that you would have a unified governments and corporations on African continent, okay, of all of them, Of course, his idea, his plan didn't work. The colonial forces have certainly opposed it. The Western countries, and led by the United States, opposed it. And Nkrumah was a martyr of that thing. So anyway, so Pan-Africanism, yes, but I think my position and the position of many of us was critical, skeptical, and probably thought, okay, in fact, it didn't exactly work. And if Africa is to be unified and to the fight is to be won, then other forms of association and organization are required, right? It's not only this approach and making those claims. There are others that arise, different alliances. The alliance of there was already Afro-Asian alliance. There was some unity and cooperation between the Afro-Asian alliance that goes back to Bandung and the countries that emerged after the Second World War, and that they wanted to have a non-aligned position. They didn't want to take sides in the Cold War and that kind of thing, right? And as a consequence, a lot of them, you don't want to choose sides. You must choose side or you will be punished, okay? And we know the history of that kind of thing. So in a way, that 1956 conference that takes place in Paris in 1956, the Congress of Black Writers and Artists and that thing, it was labeled cultural Bandung, the second Bandung, but cultural. Partly because the French authorities were not so enamored of having a political Bandung at that point in Paris with those people who were still under French colonial rule. Anyway, sorry.
No, yesterday during the Q&A, you mentioned that you have been carrying the story of Mário with you for 40 years. So you must have discovered his work already in that, well, in the 70s, in the 80s perhaps?
Yes, subconscious vanity made me lie. It's actually 52 years ago I discovered Mário's work. I discovered his name in a text that he wrote that was published in English in Havana. And there was a conference about culture and national liberation was a paper he made, right? And in that paper, because after my undergraduate studies, I was between things. I don't know, maybe I was surprised that I finally graduated. And I didn't want to stop, so I applied to graduate school. But I simply wanted to study like African history or something like that. And I didn't get admitted, so I had a year to wait to reapply. It was summer, and I thought, like, I don't really want to leave school because if I leave, who knows if I will come back. So I took courses in our university. You could take courses all year round. The summer session was another quarter. It was 10 weeks. Each one was 10 weeks, 4 quarters. You could finish really fast and you could do a lot of things. So I stayed for summer quarter, and through my friend Trevor and others, I learned about this course in the Latin American Studies department. And it was a short course on the history of Cuba. And some of my friends had studied with these professors, and they said, yeah, you should check it out. So I went, and the professors were very kind of serious but open-minded, and they had started to think that film could be useful and interesting as a way to stimulate students and interest, and also to give a interesting sense of Latin America and its dynamism and that thing, right? So the new Latin American cinema was happening at the time, and one component of that was the cinema of Cuba, who had a thriving and interesting documentary and newsreel section in that cinema, right? So I went there. It's a chance to read a lot about Cuba, learn a lot about Cuba, and meet all the radical friends on campus. And they started to show some films about the literacy campaign. Films like for Primera Vez, the first time, they take cinemobiles to the countryside, and people see movies for the first time because they didn't have cinema, and they see Charlie Chaplin. And then you film them watching the film, you know. It's a very beautiful film if you know it. And it was that film, then a film, there was a fiction film, Brigadista. And it's about the young ones, teenagers, high school. They go to the countryside because Cuba had a campaign of teaching every person how to, just the alphabetization. Huh? And it's what happens in the course of that campaign. The fact that they're willing to do it, they go like scouts, you know, and they go to the countryside and they teach people to read and write. And I thought, wow, this is a way to be involved and to account for yourself politically and your social commitment. And you actually make something interesting, right? So cinema, oh yeah, I could think about that. And so I started to be more interested in it, engage with it. I ended up joining that course for a master's degree because I really liked those people and they were great teachers. And I started to tell my friends, yeah, I'm interested in that. And I learned more about, I take another course and you could see a film about, like from Cinema Novo, you could see Ganga Zumba. Huh? And these films are interesting because they make a film about a slave revolt in Brazil, da-da-da. In fact, we didn't have any film in the American, then contemporary American cinema that one could watch without gagging about this subject. Huh? So you could see how they could subvert a person like me, right? So I fell in love with these movies. Huh? And they were radical. They were certainly beyond anything I was capable of, right? But I shared some interest, and I still love these movies until today. And that became a way that I started to be interested passionately about it, quietly. Huh? And when I said to my friend, Trevor, oh, I think I'm really interested in cinema, and I think, oh, but you must know Jean-Luc Godard. Of course I don't know Jean-Luc Godard, but you have to. So he gave me books and things about that. Then I asked my Ethiopian Marxist comrade friend, who they travel in summer, to buy me the entire list of Cineast magazine. It was a kind of left-wing Marxist magazine about cinema. And he would go. He didn't know why he was doing it, but he thought, okay, it's for him. So I started to accumulate all these things. Then I met a friend, and I dedicate this talk to him. His name is Mário Vieira da Silva, and he's Brazilian, and he's quite old. He's nearly 90, so he's many years older than me, but when I met him, he was already an older adult, but he was just finishing the cinema school at UCLA. He's the first person that I knew who actually made movies. He's the first person to take me to UCLA Film School. And he's the first person that I act in a film that he was shooting, this kind of thing. And he was a wonderful, talented man, very anarchist and very demanding, okay, and very surrealist. He was truly a student of Buñuel, and he had the facility with the language and to think and to create this kind of poetic cinema. And he was my teacher. And he was certainly sympathetic to the ideas, that kind of thing. And it was a time of the dictatorship in Brazil. So he came out of the place to get an education and to build his life, he and his wife, Vera. And they built an interesting life, and they knew a lot of people. They needed to be careful politically because the regime was not so forgiving of people making noises outside. But through that, I learned a lot more about, and encouraged to learn a lot more about Brazil, about Brazilian cinema, about Brazilian people. And I sort of met and was connected to a lot of those people. I only realized the dream of being with those people 2 years ago when I went to Brazil first time. But so that was part of it. That was part of the world. Because of my Jamaican friends, another part of my community, life community and political community, was this Jamaican people from Jamaica in the West Indies, who were in the United States at the time to study, to make their life, some settle permanently. The idea before was you would get your education and you would go back to your country and you would help to transform it, that kind of thing. A lot of people ended up staying, raising families, wonderful young people, many of whom visit us in Portugal and places. They find me. But, and that, I say that because, believe it or not, it's not so typical. I'm not trying to claim singularity and that kind of thing, but it's an experience that's a bit different because the African-American population is very big, very diverse, it's in all the regions of the country, and they don't need to have other groups to associate. It's enough for them to be together and not like each other, right? But it is available to you, people from other parts of the world, from the Caribbean, from Africa, from that thing. And I had a tendency to be open to that, and I have the good fortune. I have Black American friends just like me, born like me, in the South and other parts of the country, that are very dear. I'm losing more of them, but I was with them for 50 years or more. So I have all kind of people, but in my political, so-called cultural, intellectual formation, I think my world is pretty wide and rich, I think. And it partly accounts for my affinity for some subjects and some people.
One of the many fascinating things about Mário is how we see how the trajectories of certain political figures or political militants intersected with the trajectories of filmmakers. I mean, we see Osman Sembene at a certain time, we see Chris Marker, we see Sarah Madror, of course. What was the work of those filmmakers also part of your world at the time, your learnings?
Fortunately, once I went to film school, as I continued to pursue this secret passion and idea that I would one day make films, I started to discover these figures. Usman Sembene was already making his film and was trying to invent a kind of African cinema. And because I went to the film school at UCLA, and it was possible that we had a teacher, Alicio Taylor, who was there for 1 year that I was there, and he was able to invite these people, Sembene and other, Pauline Vieira and the rest were traveling in the country, and he could invite them and they could come to UCLA, show their films, and we could discuss with them and ask questions, that kind of thing. So that's partly how I learned about Sembene. Also, Sembene was in the Cineast magazine, and I learned about him there. And then we learned that he's a novelist and things like that, so he becomes a kind of attractive figure. Sarah Madror, we saw Sambi Zanga, and Sambi Zanga is unusual because it was a film that was made in cooperation, in connection with MPLA and the National Liberation Movement in Angola. And it's one of the rare films. It's a rare and singular kind of film. And it was made in cooperation with the organization, but more importantly with the collaboration of Mario Pinto de Andrade, and also many of the people who appear in the film were they were the guerrilla fighters of the MPLA who were in Brazzaville at the time. The woman is actually Cape Verdean, and she's in the first film, Monogambe. She plays in Monogambe. And she's Cape Verdean, and also she's a militant of PAIGC, but she's a trained economist. She's a doctor of economics. She's not an actor, and Sarah convinced her to do this. She tried to convince some people who appear in the film, younger militants at the time, like Adolfo Maria, but Adolfo Maria refused to play a PED, so he's not in the film. And it's, so I learned this later, right? But Sarah was already a reference, right? And Sarah was interesting for us because she's a singular figure. She made one of the first films by black woman in Africa, feature films, okay? And Sarah becomes a more interesting reference because, in fact, Sarah is French. Her father is from Guadeloupe, but her mother was French. She's an incredible figure because she's a person of obviously tremendous talent and creativity. She was an actor, so she works very well with actors. She made herself, because I think she was orphaned early in life. She hungered, she wanted the culture that she has, she fought for. She wanted this culture. Nobody gave it to her. She fought for it, for books, for poetry, for theater. She was in one of the first black, I say black, but it's African and Caribbean people who made theater, the griots in Paris in 1950s, okay? And doing avant-garde plays and this kind of thing. It's really important. The other thing is Sarah was in the film school in Moscow with Usman Simbin, studying with Mark Donskoy, who made the Gorky trilogy. And Gorky trilogy for romantic communists is very important because of his own biography and his role in the revolution, but he's a son of the even low peasants, right? And it's 3 books. You know this book? My Childhood, My Universities, and I forgot my youth, no, my childhood, my youth, my universities. And his university was his creative life and discovering the politics in the world and all that. But Donskoy was their teacher. And I learned some of these things later, but that was it's already a key interest. How many people had the chance to study cinema and this kind of thing? And she did. And then I learned the connection I learned more. Certainly, we can always learn more about the relationship between Sarah and Mario, how they meet, how it was in the pursuit. He's working in the President's African. She's at the President's African all the time, reading, da-da-da-da. So like that. And Babacar Sam, the cousin of Simbin, the filmmaker who made Jom and one of the early Senegalese filmmakers and Fespaco guys, he's from the same theater troupe. Yeah.
You went to study at the UCLA at a time when not only the norms and conventions of education, but also the norms and conventions of filmmaking were being rethought, radically rethought. And with this context in mind, I'm always reminded of this quote that Globo Rocha used to say a lot. It comes from a poem. I don't know which way I'm going when I'm not going that way.
Yeah.
So it evokes new horizons and new pathways. Was that something that was very much felt at the school at the time? We have to rediscover how to make films ourselves, start from zero?
I think the film school was, in general, the film school. And it's not without the context and the compulsions and the challenges of the draft in the United States and the cultural changes that were happening, right? Young people want to change everything because the old ones messed it up. So in that school, you already had people who were thinking radical thoughts about cinema, if only about cinema. They were thinking radical thoughts about how to live because they didn't want to be drafted and sent to Vietnam. They were opposed to that. Some actively opposed to that, some for their own reasons. And they were trying to put this in cinema under the influence of all the things that happened after the Nouvelle Vague and the development of the cinema in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and all of that. And people were looking for other ways and other possibilities. And also the belief, almost a kind of religious fervor and belief that cinema could change the world, that you could change the world by cinema, you could change the world by music, by this kind of thing, right? And the school was already like that. Some young people, Mexican-American, Asians, black ones, and that who were at the school, started to push for greater access to the school by these groups of people, and with some support from their peers in the film school. Also, after the Watts Revolt, 1965, and Newark and Detroit and all that, the leading, the establishment people and the leading foundations, institutions, and the churches and all those things started to say, well, if all of this is happening, perhaps there are things that are wrong and we should try to address them. Some for devious and their own reasons, but they felt that if we don't break the current patterns and practices of the politics and the limitations on people, and we keep the ways of discrimination and repression and that thing, we will reap the problems. So, some of these people, they must be convinced that they can live out their expectations, their potential, and all this. So we need to open some space, and we should allow that. And we need to, okay, well, you don't find any, well, you should find some. So they put resources, energy, and effort into doing that. So it meant that we could, and I always say that those rebellions were not so bleak and nihilistic. In fact, they were optimistic. People realized that there was something beyond the horizons that were imposed or that they had accepted, and that other things, they believed other things were possible. So you could do completely irrational and unreasonable thing, like study film, or go to graduate school. And of course, if you don't come from the social group or class that normally expects to go to university because the grandfather went and that kind of thing, I say it's unreasonable because your mother asks you, "You still in school? And she doesn't know that there's a master's, a PhD, or any of that. And many of us probably didn't know it growing up, or we never saw it, right? So in a way, it's a new thing, new people coming to the realizations and this horizons widening. And so you start to suppose and presume that maybe, yes, you could do that, when you didn't even know it was a profession before. I take this myself. I don't say that this is a reality for all of my peers. They're much more sophisticated than me, I'm sure. Some grew up in enlightened places like Los Angeles, but I'm a migrant. I come from a less advanced place. And that was the case. So in that school, once we were there in significant numbers, and we carried the expectation and the spirit of the people who weren't going to the school, but they created the circumstances under which we could advance and go to the school. So there was a kind of ethic among the people there who were maybe more advanced. I'm thinking of my colleague Haile Garima and Larry Clark and some of the others, that in fact, because they are the source of our being able to have access to these things, we owe it to them to make sure that what we do responds somehow to the larger community. Okay? So there's this thing that what we do at school is not just for school, it's not just for showing off, but it needs to answer to the people who support our being here. Okay? So we need to keep relations, keep connections to that. So it's already a larger project than just your lessons, okay? So insofar as we carried that and we shared that, and it was the context that we were able to pursue our studies and to try to make something, and we had the idea that we weren't satisfied with what existed and what was being made, and that we should make our own, and we should do it together, and we should have a greater goal, even if it's a simple goal, of addressing the things that we knew, that we valued, that we thought were important, and that needed to be criticized or needed to be elevated. And we fight among ourselves about what that is and what it means and that thing. But we don't impose on you how you should do it. And politically, we differed. Huh? We don't agree on everything. We agree minimally that the work we do should relate to the people that we are connected to, that made it possible for us to be in this place, and who are not here. We're responsible for that. We don't waste time, we don't BS, because we know how we are here. So I think that gave us a floor, gave us a motivation. The dynamics change, more people come, different people come, women come, bring other questions, bring other issues, bring other sensibility. We need to learn to see that. So it was that. And then our peers, from at the time, because the United States was involved with a lot of countries in the world, one way or another, and people came to the United States to study, sometimes encouraged and given scholarships because they wanted connection to those parts of the world. Sometimes those worlds changed, like a lot of our peers found themselves there at the time of the Iranian Revolution. They made some of the first films about the Iranian Revolution, but they were in the Cine Club with us, watching third world cinema and this kind of thing. We formed a group. This group allowed us to invite guests so we could have the Antonio Higuino, who's from Jorge Sanjinas' group. We can have Glauber Rocha in exile. He passes through not only us, but the wider school. So that made it a rich and interesting experience. Not everybody was on the same page. Not all of them wanted to be Cinema Nova or Godard or anything like that. Some of them just wanted to make movies and be happy and make. But even those people, they wanted to make popular movies, but intelligent ones. Even the most commercial guy, I remember I saw his movie later, and there's a poster of Angela Davis in the movie. And nobody in the group thought he thought anything about that, but he did. He was there. He had his own reason, his own take. But, sorry, I think I went on too much.
Shall we watch a clip?
Yes, as you wish.
So we will watch a clip of your graduation film at UCLA, Bless the Little Hearts, which came out in 83, 84, I think. Can we have clip number 1, please?
Girl, don't tell me you coming down with the pink eye.
I feel all right.
Is that little boy your boyfriend?
Which one?
You know the one I'm talking about, that little fat chubby one.
Oh, yeah.
It's okay if you don't want me in your business. One of these days you're going to want my advice. Because a man ain't something you just grow up to know about. Although it's kind of cute to be shy about it now. I remember when I was your age, I used to watch my mama do without something to eat. Just so me and my brothers and sisters could eat. And I said when I got big, I was going to give her all she wanted, and I was going to righteously spoil her. Then I got married, and there ain't been no promises kept. Boy, put that stuff back in that drawer. Let's get on these walls, because you know all these little fingerprints ain't mine and your daddy. Boy, you can just cut the clowning. Blind man standing on the corner. He said, I don't need $1. And don't you give me $10 until you bring back
The people try to tell me to stop crying. Find someone new.
So this was actually a montage. The last scene that you saw was actually later in the film, but it was your choice to edit them together because of the choice of music partly. Already in this film, you see how music is important in your work, not only as a structural device, but also as a kind of emotional arc. So maybe you can talk a bit how you tend to work with music.
Maybe it's kind of it's partly intuitive. Huh? You listen to a lot of it. You have the images, you have the material, and you spend at least I spend a long time with it. And then you try to, in that case, it's very simple, my idea. I don't know if it succeeds. But it was to give the sense to the, first it's used over that male character. And there, my idea is it suggests he has an inner world. He has a world that's not obvious, that's not on the surface. And so I thought the music can suggest that. And then when I used the music with him, and I had the sequence of her falling asleep on the bus, I decided to use it again, to give it to her, but because it's the same music, same song, and I allow more words, it's connected to both of them in a way. And I thought because she's the main support of the family in a way in this thing, and so that's why I use it, and I wanted to connect them. In that case, that's what happened. And I chose to do it here because it seemed you had chosen already the first scene with him on the car, and I remembered her, and I thought it might be good to put them together. My idea, I will disclose the thing. What happened was you chose the scene of he arrives home, or he's sitting on the bed and she's sleeping, and I think. My idea was to go from that to him on the car and then her on the bus, so that we would keep it with the two of them, but you were charmed by the children. And I thought, okay, this is a good choice. Maybe it gives a better sense of the movie without them having to see the whole thing. But that's it. Other times, that film has the principal music is two kinds of music is from the same group, duo, is Archie Shepp and Horace Parlan, and they made this 2 albums in the early 80s or something in Sweden.
It's Going Home and...
Going Home and Trouble in Mind. So one is classic blues music and the other is spirituals, okay? So, and I was playing between them. It seemed to give the movies something important because it's old music in a way. It's not tied to the time of this movie, and at the same time it's played enough and evolved enough that it's kind of classical, even if it's played on jazz what's instruments associated with jazz. So that's why I used it. It seemed to work after 2 years of fiddling with it, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Of course, music is also very important in Mário. I think most of the music you use is from either Angola or Guinea-Bissau.
And I have some music from Cape Verde.
From Cape Verde as well.
Yeah.
I imagine that it's very much part of your research as well, to go into certain musical histories.
Yeah, I learned about a lot of different music, and then we came up with the ones that we came up with. I learned about more than I was able to use, or, you know, thought I could use with some without being offensive, you know, without violating the music and the musicians and that kind of thing. That it was somehow related and it gave something to the film, without being too literal or whatever. So yeah.
There's another thing for me that already this film shows or showcases is a lot of your films are about solitude. I mean, you use the song "Solitude" by Billie Holiday in one of your films, and I think it's not a coincidence. It's very much, I think, most of your films are very much about the need for sociality, socialization, community, and communalization. I think it's already in this film. I remember that somebody described the pocketbook as a kind of meeting between two solitudes.
Yes.
So I don't know, is that something that appeals to you, this kind of dynamics, tension between solitude and community? Togetherness?
Yeah, I think so, probably. I mean, it's the condition, really, right? Even the idea of you want to be a part of a collective to make change and that kind of thing, there's still the sad fact that we're solitary and we're singular, right? We want to be with the others because that's our strength, that's how we even exist, but at the same time we need the solitude. But it also can be miserable, you understand? So I think that's a tension. And also you have a figure like Mário, it seems. He needs the freedom to think inside the commitment and the collective and the common project. And he needs the space to think creatively. And he believed that for himself and for others. And it also can put you in conflict with those that you are committed to and with, because they don't necessarily. Sometimes we have to accept the agreed upon direction, even if we doubt, if it's the one that is agreed upon for the betterment of all, and we've signed on to that, we need to accept, even if it's painful. But if we are principled and we always, when there's a possibility of discussion, we raise our objections, and they know that we won't betray what is finally decided, but we need to raise that because it's not good to not do it and regret it later or not put it before them to consider before they do something that we all later regret, huh? But that's not easy in a revolutionary movement or these things. It's not so easy because we need to be united, but we don't need, if we united around a bad direction or whatever, it's probably not going to turn out well. So, but that doesn't always feel good to everybody involved. Not everybody agrees with that approach. So it's, you know, it's the tendency. The uninitiated is democratic centralism, right? It can be a paradox or a contradiction, and a very miserable one, right? But also necessary. We must agree on something. Okay? That was the tendency of those movements and that thing. So yeah, I understand, and I think it's important to remember. Probably also it's a good thing to remember that every disagreement and every difference does not have to be terminal. We do not need to liquidate those who disagree on the other side of an issue, right? Because later you're going to come to regret it, oftentimes. Huh? And in the Godard's movie, the Notre Musique, they say if you kill a man for an idea, what you've really done is kill a man. And don't feel excluded, a woman or a child or whatever. It still applies, right? So I think that's part of that's the tragedy, but we have to be. I say we. I think we have to be aware of these things. It's part of the lesson. All these horrible fights about things that, do they mean anything 20 years later? Your position on that and his position on that. You might think, oh, this might last longer than my next birthday, so.
Do you guys have any questions for Billy? Please raise your hand if you have.
Make up something, it's not nice.
Let's go ahead. I will repeat the question then.
Yes, I have a question about the conflict scene later on in Bless Their Little Hearts between the couples. This one staying very long conflict scene. I was wondering how that came about because I thought it was very strong. I was wondering if it was scripted or how you take it.
I think, okay, I answered very quickly, as most people maybe didn't see that. What happens is, yes, it was written, but it was only a page of description of where they were in the relationship, how they, what she knows about what's going on with him and what she thinks about what's going on with him. They are where they are in the story. They are where they are in a relationship. What he might attempt to do to evade the charges that she's bringing about him, and that was it. The movement, the language, the words, all of those things is completely from the actors and from the handheld camera. And it's the second take, complete. 10 minutes, cut off the head and the tail. And we couldn't do it again because they had nothing left. And also it was, we started the first one, and he grabs her. And we stop after 1 minute, 40 seconds, because the fact is you can't grab her. You can't touch her. you need to figure out another way. Because if you do that, everything stops. And that's literally true, and it was true for that scene. When you have to listen and you have to bob and weave and dodge and all that thing, it's interesting. That can go on for a while. But hitting people and grabbing people and that thing is nowhere. So.
Anyone else? Yes, please.
I have a question about process and the conditions of possibility for you to make your films. So looking to say Blessed by Real Hearts and Mário, and I'm specifically curious about the place and stakes of collectivity and autonomy, because I think what's really beautiful with what Clyde Taylor called the LA Rebellion, your kinship with filmmakers, is when you look at the credits and you can see all of your names appearing again and again and again, and there's this sense of things that were made together, and I'm curious about how that's changed, but then also this sort of constant struggle over memory and autonomy. When we look to the present at the genocide in Gaza, a really important part of the Palestinian liberation struggle is having autonomy over the means of representation and being able to use cinema as a vehicle for memory. So yeah, again, I mean, knowing that the arc of your life has been motivated by all these things, and maybe looking to this early film and this most recent one, and how that's worked out.
Those movies, the early ones, that one, I could make it because I had access to the equipment. I had access to the friends and colleagues, and I had some financial support from the National Endowments for the Arts, from the AFI, and it was not enough money, but we thought we were rich. And then so I had that. And I had the previous 3-4 years of being a part of this group. And it meant I had their support and I had a big crew when I started. At the end, I had like 3, 4, whatever. But it's normal because they had to go on and do things with their life or finish it. And we tended to work on each other's films. It was partly how you learned to do that. And that was a condition of our existence, in that we were in school together. And we were pursuing this. We wanted to make something. And it was an ethic that the way you learn is you work on the work of others. Once you pay it forward, when your time comes, it comes to you. The actors, the people who perform in our films, they usually were people that the others had worked with, and you inherited them. Your principal responsibility was not to screw it up so that the next one can work with those people. So it was a kind of way to do that. Later, once we left school, we have a kind of, some of us have closer relations than others. We maintain contact, we're in touch, we worry about each other, that kind of thing. We disperse, we did other things, we lived other lives. And sometimes we come together, or we try to care for each other, care for the work, care for the welfare of each other. we were brought together 2011 around this project, this formalization of this project, this claim about LA rebellion, that kind of thing. And then, so I have that. They are there, the ones that are there. And then when I started to do other things and meet other people, and it happened with all of us, we kind of extend our relations to others because of life and work and that kind of thing. And you learn maybe to be a part of other communities or groups or, you know, combinations. And you work with that. So, yeah, I think that's it. Also, I can say, and I only stay on the subject, it's a very interesting story about, at least maybe, what would you call it, modern Palestinian cinema. Over the years, there have been different organizations of festivals and participation, and also the Cahiers makes a big special issue or supplement about it, and you can learn. And they've made some interesting and important contributions in the cinema, and to just speak of Michel Khalife, who is the teacher of some of the younger ones who come after. His Wedding in Galilee and Fertile Memory and all those things. And I remember his description of his course at the film school in Brussels, where he went to school in Brussels, right?
Not that one, but yeah.
And he asked the young Palestinians to think about cinema and what is its relationship to us. What do we bring to it? What do we expect and demand from it? Huh? So I think, yeah, it's useful to think and compare and be in touch and have some knowledge about that. They've been struggling for those things for a long time. Jocelyn Saab in Lebanon. Yeah, so there's a lot. And your question about possibility, memory, and this kind of thing. Autonomy. I think that's a possibility. Maybe when we show some other clips, we can return to that, okay? Yeah, I think so. I think I will.
How much time do we have left? 3 minutes.
Oh, we don't have time for more of that thing.
We actually prepared 8 clips. We were a bit too ambitious, I think.
Maybe they can put them online.
One more? Choose one. You can choose one.
Okay, choose one. We do the Marseille one, so we give it some leaving music.
Just for you to know, we had something by Van der Keuken, something by Stork and Evans, Vincent Monnikendam, Osman Sembène, of course. But to finish, we have clip 8. I think that's because of the music, no?
Partly.
Yeah. The last clip, please. 8. Yeah.
Mademoiselle Marseillaise m'a donné rendez-vous pour sortir avec elle, enfin, mais je ne sais pas où. La chercher, il me faut la chercher, oh ouais. La trouver, je dois la retrouver, oh papa. Je vais voir à Saint-Jean et au quartier du Panier. J'interroge les gens pour savoir où elle est. On me dit qu'on l'a vue vendre des limaçons. J'ai beaucoup ri les rues, j'entends pas sa chanson. Oh famille et Marcia, Montesies escondida. Oh famille et Marcia, Versailles es perdida. Remontant Canebière, j'ai le cœur qui s'emballe. On l'aurait vu hier, eh ouais, au palais de cristal. Mauvaise limonade, y a plus que des musées, que des belles façades, mais rien pour s'amuser. Il faut chercher partout, des collines à la mer, ça fait un sacré beau, des calanques à la nette, c'est une histoire de fou, ça fait des kilomètres.
You want to ask a question?
Sorry. One more. Yeah.
Oh, I think, okay. Maybe we'll talk about it later. I don't tell you, I don't suppose I should tell you what you should do. But maybe if you have access to and you consider what has gone before, you will probably make the best judgment of what is missing better than me. You know that thing that Frantz Fanon says, each generation confronts its own world and its challenge and need to change, and it's up to you to figure that out. If you only rely on what went before, as helpful as it may be, it may restrain or restrict you in your quest.
Thank you all. Thank you, Billy.